Okay. All right. So tonight we'll do an introduction to the Book of Revelation. And I want to do this before we go to verse 1, chapter 1, verse 1. We need to do an introduction to it. And there is a reason why. One reason we do an introduction is because the Book of Revelation is unique in the New Testament. Not unique in the Old Testament, but unique in the New Testament because it's this type of writing style called apocalyptic writing. There's apocalyptic writing in the Old Testament, but this is the only full book of the Bible in the New Testament's apocalyptic writing. You could also, there's other sections, I'll put it this way. There's other brief sections in the New Testament has apocalyptic writing in it, but this is the only full book or large quantity of it. So we need to have an introduction to even what apocalyptic writing is and cover that tonight. And then the other thing that's super duper important to how you interpret the Book of Revelation is dating when it was written. Extremely important. The answer to when you believe it was written strongly influences how you interpret the book as a whole. And so that's what we're going to cover in the introduction to Revelation that we're starting tonight. If we can get through both topics tonight, that's fine. If not, we'll break them apart and do one topic tonight and the other topic next week. We'll start, and I've got in my notes, I guess, starting with just apocalyptic writing, like in that whole part of it. Just an introduction to apocalyptic writing itself. It's the kind of writing that is probably some of the least common writing in the Bible. However, in the few hundred years prior to Jesus, so like in the time period of the prophets, and the first century, probably in the second or third century is probably when it kind of died out, or second century, but there, it wasn't just the Bible. There was whole books and things in that time written in apocalyptic style. It was a common form of literature. So when somebody in the first century picked this up, that was a Jew, especially, even the non-Jews, there were non-Jewish cultures in that area that utilize apocalyptic writing style. So when they picked it up, most of them would know exactly what they were reading and interpret it in that way. It's not common anymore. So it hasn't been common for centuries. So that's why we got to kind of readjust our brain to say, okay, now we're reading apocalyptic writing. We got to kind of tune our brains in and figure out how to read it. Okay, so can somebody tell me some of the different types of writings that's in the Bible?
Poetic.
Yeah, poetic. I just mentioned apocalyptic. What are some other ones?
Puzzling.
What was that? Puzzling. Yeah, puzzling. So, all right. So what are some other ones? Historical narratives or history, books of history, and narratives, similar type of thing.
Are those two different ones?
Yes. Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah. I mean, they're very similar, but I guess technically they'd be two different. Historic would be like Moses writing about the things that have already happened in kind of a matter-of-fact way. A narrative would be like the Gospels, where the people writing it are given an account of what they saw, like they're writing the narrative of what they experienced, versus recording the history of the Jews that Moses did and wrote down, that kind of thing. Sometimes I think they kind of overlap, but I think if you really wanted to draw a distinction and separate them out, possibly the things a person's writing down happened before they lived even. And that's some of the Old Testament that happened. Then there's prophetic writing. Obviously, the books of the prophets would be prophetic writing. There's wisdom literature in the Bible. You can think of Solomon wrote a lot of that, Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. Anyway, I'm not sure, maybe more, but that hits the main ones. So let's narrow down a little bit on describing the apocalyptic writing style. I would argue that the apocalyptic writing style is actually a form of poetry. It's a subset of poetry. You're using grandiose, poetic type of language in order to describe large-scale, pivotal, and oftentimes involving judgments of God, events in human history. So 3 criteria there. It's usually large scale. It's usually pivotal, like changing in the ruling power in the world, right? Like the Roman Empire falling, the Jews falling, temple falling, Babylon falling, right? So it's usually catastrophic, usually involves changing of power, and usually involves some type of judgment. It's happening because God has judged those people, and it's being carried out. And so then they use this grandiose poetic language to let you feel the impact. And it's usually cosmic language. You might realize that's another criteria. It's typically, apocalyptic writing usually involves cosmic type of language, usually involving celestial bodies, the moon, the sun, the stars, the foundations of heaven, right? Or the earth, foundations of the earth, stuff like that. Because they want you to know how important it was. Now, this is something we accept when we look at like poetry. I mean, one of my favorite Psalms is Psalms 23. It says, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for he is present with me. He lies me down beside still waters." You know, and he just keeps going. Is he actually talking about a real event? No, but he's giving you this awesome, cool description. The valley of the shadow of death. That's pretty over the top. But he wants you to feel it. Death was all around him. You know, his enemies were everywhere. And though he walked through that valley of the shadow of death, I believe he was describing what it felt like during his battle. I can't remember which one it was, but the armies were surrounding him. They were everywhere, you know. And though he walks that valley, he calls it the valley of the shadow of death. It wasn't literally what was going on, but it's his way of using poetry to make you feel what he felt like in that moment. But he says, even though he walks that valley, God leadeth him to lie down beside still waters. Did he really go lie down beside? No. But that's how God made him feel, and that's where God led him out of that danger. And so apocalyptic writing, you could say, is a subset of poetry. It's just using that same kind of poetic language and symbolism to describe, you know, these pivotal events, changing human power, usually dealing with God's judgment, that kind of stuff. She's using the same kind of language we use in poetry in order to describe those things. So the only way to sometimes to really know what it's talking about is if the writer or later on the Bible somewhere tells you about an event that happened at that same time period. Right? That's how we've confirmed most of them. Okay, so how we know that they're talking about the fall of Babylon is because another writer talks about it and refers back to it, or the same writer later on will tell you that's what it's talking about because it's already happened, or it did happen, and later on in the scripture, if God says, I'm going to judge this nation or these nations or whatever, and it had all the apocalyptic language, and then later on it actually happens, and you go, oh, that's obviously what it was about, right? Here's the problem. Revelation is the last book in the Bible. So we don't have anything written after that's in the Bible, if you just want to stick to the 4 corners of the Bible and the pages therein, to go back and look and say, yeah, that happened. So what we have to do then is, if we wanted to say, yeah, that already happened, we'd have to look at external sources outside of the Bible, this recorded history, to say, well, yeah, that's what it was talking about. People get uncomfortable with that sometimes because they say we should be able to stay within Scripture alone to interpret and understand Scripture. And I agree with that for the most part. It's just when we had apocalyptic writing previously in the Bible, there was more Bible to talk about what it was talking about. But since Revelation is the last book, there's no more Bible to go back and talk about it. So then the only thing to turn to then would be to look at, history, recorded history. So that is apocalyptic writing style. Let's give some examples of it. There are some Old Testament examples and New Testament examples of apocalyptic writing style. I've listed some of them here. There's many more in the Old Testament, but I listed about 4 or 5 pretty good ones, okay? Anybody want to turn and read Isaiah 13?
All of it?
No. you can just start at the beginning. We'll go for a while. I think in the first like 12 or 15 verses, there's multiple types. There's multiple times you see apocalyptic writing in there. So Isaiah 13, just start from the beginning. We'll go down a ways till we've hit some of it. And there's more scattered throughout the entire chapter and chapter 14 as well.
Prophecy against Babylon that Isaiah son of Amos saw. Raise a banner on a bare hilltop. Shout to them, beckon to them to enter the gates of the nobles. I have commanded those I prepared for battle. I have summoned my warriors to carry out my wrath, those who rejoice in my triumph. Listen, a noise on the mountains like that of a great multitude. Listen, an uproar among the kingdoms like nations massing together. The Lord Almighty is mustering an army for war. They come from faraway lands, from the ends of the heavens, the Lord and the weapons of his wrath to destroy the whole country. Wail, for the day of the Lord is near. It will come like destruction from the Almighty. Because of this, all hands will go limp. Every heart will melt with fear. Terror will seize them. Pain and anguish will grip them. They will writhe like a woman in labor. They will look aghast at each other, their faces aflame. See, the day of the Lord is coming, a cruel day with wrath and fierce anger to make the land desolate and destroy the sinners within it. The stars of heaven and their constellations will not show their light. The rising sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. I will punish the world for its evil, the wicked for their sins. I will put an end to the arrogance of the haughty and will humble the pride of the ruthless. Shall I keep going?
Yeah, can at some point, you don't have to, but I think a couple verses down it talks about the heavens shaking and the earth shaking. And it says the earth will be removed from its place, I think, if you keep going at some point. Which verse is that? Can you see that one where it says the earth will be removed from its, what is it? 13. Somebody read 13.
Therefore I will shake the heavens and the earth, shall remove out of her place in the wrath of the Lord of hosts, in the day of his fierce anger.
Okay, so the earth will be removed from its place. I mean, there was a lot of it in there. The constellations and different things you won't be able to see, or they won't show their brightness from about the entire heavenly areas, won't be seen. And then my favorite one out of all that was the whole idea of the earth being taken out of its place. If we were to say this is a literal interpretation, everything literally had to have happened. Was the earth moved from one solar system to another? Did the earth change its orbit? If you're going to take that literal, yeah, or blue, whatever. If we treated every bit of apocalyptic writing like people like to try to treat Revelation, I couldn't make sense of that. What kind of wild stuff was going on? I like that. I want to know what solar system we started in. Or were we originally where Mars was now? Mars is where we, what is, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just about to say, the end of the world, there's not going to be no earth. It's going to be totally destroyed.
Well, but that's not talking about the end of the world. That's talking about the fall of Babylon.
Yeah, but it's still, well.
No, I'm saying the author literally tells you before he starts that he's writing about the fall of Babylon.
Prophecy against Babylon.
Yeah, against Babylon. Yeah. Ezekiel talks about the fall of Babylon as well, talking about it's like the loose for the morning star falling from the sky, using celestial language, talking about the king of Babylon at that point in Ezekiel. So that's an example of apocalyptic writing. I just mentioned Ezekiel, Isaiah 24 and 27. Here's one. Those are whole chapters. Here's one that's kind of shorter. Joel 2:28 through 32. Anybody want to go there? Joel 2:28 through 32. This one's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. I can't remember. Joel, about halfway through, switches from the first destruction of Jerusalem and starts prophesying the second. It's really, I think, the first recorded prophecy of the second destruction of Jerusalem that happened in 70 AD. Yeah, I had to read Joel again. I can't remember exactly where it switches over. This is about the time it starts switching from the Babylonian destruction. It was about to happen to the second destruction. of Jerusalem.
The trumpet in Zion, the sound and alarm in my holy mountain. Let the inhabitants of the land tremble, for the day of the Lord cometh, for it is nigh at hand. A day of darkness and of gloominess, a day of clouds, and of thick darkness as the morning spread upon the mountains. A great people and a strong, there hath not been ever the like, neither shall be any more after it, even the years of many generations.
I don't, you're in one, it's two.
Yeah, I am reading too.
28 through.
Oh, 20.
Yeah, 20. There's still some apocalyptic stuff in there. Talking about the light not shining for generations. Yeah, it was talking about the light. Talking about a trumpet. It was talking about a trumpet being heard in the mountains. So, like, again, in the New Testament, trumpets will sound. That's almost always like grab your attention. That's almost always code words in apocalyptic writing for grab your attention. Like the trumpets of the Lord ascend. The Lord's making a proclamation, basically, and everybody's going to hear.
Section marks.
Yeah, that's good. And it also said day of the Lord, which it also said when we were reading in Isaiah earlier. Almost every time apocalyptic writing talks about day of the Lord, because it involves judgment from God. Usually. Yeah, go ahead. You have them marked too. Go ahead.
And it shall come to pass afterward that I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your old men shall dream dreams. Your young men shall see visions. And also upon the servants and upon the handmaids in those days will I pour out my spirit. And I will show wonders in the heavens and in the earth, blood and fire and pillars of smoke. The sun shall be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the great and terrible day of the Lord come. And it shall come to pass that whosoever shall call on the name of the Lord shall be delivered, for in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem shall be deliverance, and as the Lord has said, and in the remnant whom the Lord shall call.
We studied that with Romans, didn't we?
Yeah, maybe. I think we've read it once before. But he's talking about what? The moon and the stars turning blood red and dark and different things, you know. But what's he really talking about? Anybody who studies Joel knows that he's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, both the first one and the second one. And then he also even talked about renewing, like some kind of renewal, like the heavens and earth be renewed type thing. I think there he's getting into Jesus. I think at this point he's starting to talk about the events of the first century that's about to happen as well. Talking about this whole renewal of heavens and earth and things of that nature that he's talking about in there. So that's a taste of it in the Old Testament. All right. So then there are, and I listed more here, but some of them are whole chapters. If you want to go back and read them, you can't. You're going to find the same type of language in all these places. Same type. And all these are talking about events that were in the past. So therefore we have recorded history, and we can't find other places and other sources where they literally talked about the sun and the moon turning turning to blood or going dark. In other historical documents from other places. So it's not saying it didn't. They say, Mike, the Bible's not true. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is this is apocalyptic writing. It's poetry, just like, yea, I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. I will fear no evil. You out with me, you know. You aren't with me. But it's poetry about massive turns in human events, usually involving judgment and the day of the Lord. And the day of the Lord is almost always God's enactment of judgment, right? So like, as I've mentioned in sermons, we mentioned before in Bible studies and stuff, that God gives warnings and then he gives them time to correct themselves. A lot of times he gives people warnings again, and eventually he's made his decision. And then after he makes his decision, he usually gives a final warning basically saying he's made his decision, and then there's usually some time before he carries out that judgment. But the day of the Lord, every time that it's referred to, is almost always the events where he actually carries the judgment out. Or the sentence, carries out the sentence. And that's common throughout the entire Bible, Old Testament, New Testament alike. That kind of wording. Okay, examples of apocalyptic writing in the New Testament. You got the Olivet Discourse, which is in Mark chapter 13, Matthew, mostly chapter 24, but you can kind of starts in 23 and bleeds over into 25. But the core of it's Matthew 24. And then it's also in Luke chapter 21. Then you have the return of Jesus described in 1 Thessalonians 4:13 through 5:11. You have relief from persecution described in 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 6 through 10, and all in chapter 2 as well. Then you have judgment and new heaven and earth in 2 Peter 3:13 or 3:3 through 13. So those are some places outside of the book of Revelation. Of course, the book of Revelation is almost all apocalyptic writing. But I'm saying outside of that, here's a few places in the New Testament where it's apocalyptic writing. I think some of my favorite of this is in the Olivet Discourse in Matthew chapter 24. So if you guys want to turn there and somebody wants to read some of the good ones from there, they're talking about the moon and the stars and, the almost identical wording that Jesus is using. Like almost, word for word in probably some places.
No, we're at Matthew 24.
Word for word, we heard in Joel. If you just look down through there, it's where they ask the question. There's not one stone left on another, and then they turn back and look at the temple, and then the disciples say, when is this going to happen? What will be the signs of the time? When will be the end of the age? And then after that, Jesus just starts talking about it. The wars, rumors of wars, earthquakes, blah blah. But then he really starts talking about celestial events at some point. And however much you guys, whoever, Sherry, if you're looking for it, however much you want to read, 3, 4, 5 verses, whatever, just in the best ones. When he starts talking about the celestial events, will be a good one. I knew it was down a ways. He really gets into it for several verses. There you go, 29.
Okay. Immediately after the tribulation,
there you go.
the sun will be darkened,
The sun will be darkened.
and the moon will not give the light. The stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other.
Is that not that's good? Is that an almost word for word the same thing we just read in the Old Testament? Right.
Except for Jesus on the clouds.
Yeah, right.
That already happened.
Okay. Well, a lot of times in the Old Testament, on the day of the Lord, when God brings judgment, it says He's going to come with like hosts of heaven, angels and stuff on clouds. There's that kind of verbiage on days of judgment in the Old Testament on different nations in them as well. So we could go try to find those. I could look at. I didn't find it as my thing, but there's some of that too. So it's almost all word for word out of the Old Testament about other times that great ages and kingdoms and things come to an end. So Jesus using that same kind of verbiage, and so just like Revelation, there's a great dispute on what he's talking about. He's talking about something that was about to happen, that we look through history and see the destruction of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple. That was an entire destruction of not just a human civilization, but the entire way people interacted with God had changed. Very, very disruptive to the world, to the human beings, or pivotal. I would say pivotal. Not disruptive in a bad way, disruptive in a good way, pivotal. Temple was being destroyed. It was a center of worship for him. Jerusalem was being destroyed. And it always talks about wailing, right? And grief in those times, like it did in the Old Testament, same thing. Well, because when God comes in judgment and uses human armies to do it, there's a lot of misery. Flavius Josephus recorded around 1 million people died during the siege and the battle at Jerusalem whenever they destroyed it. Huh?
It's just confusing. So, then will appear the Son of Man in heaven. He will send his angels with a loud trumpet call. He will gather his elect from the four winds.
Mm-hmm.
All this has already happened.
So
Learn this lesson.
So here's the thing. In order to interpret apocalyptic writing, you have to use everything written around it, and usually time periods. Whenever we were reading in Isaiah simply said, this is about Babylon. Okay, that means everything we're about to read had to do with the fall of Babylon. No matter how grandiose and apocalyptic type the writing was, it had to do with the physical fall of Babylon. And we interpret in that way. So when we interpret these things, and now this is a topic that will kind of lead into the dating and the different interpretations of the book of Revelation, which we'll kind of get into the last part of this page, is then we've got to look around it, the wrapper. What's this wrapped in to be able to determine it? Well, in the case of the Olivet Discourse, Jesus straight up tells you. He mentions it at least 2 or 3 times. In 23, when he's sitting there in the temple and talking to the Pharisees and called them vipers, woe to this generation, you killed the prophets and all this thing, murdered all the prophets. You're going to continue to do it even. He said all that is going to come down this generation. He says this generation gives a time frame. And then towards the end of chapter 24, he says all these things will come to pass in this generation. So all the apocalyptic stuff he's already said, and then he says all this is going to happen in this generation.
So he's already gathered his elect. That just really confuses me.
Well, what about in Luke, where Luke?
That probably confuses
Where
me.
what about in Luke, where after the
What verse is that?
where it says all these this generation shall not pass away before all these things come to be, I think is the exact word.
He will send his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the heavens to the earth. Well, he says this generation will not pass away before all
Yeah,
these
but
things
where is that?
happen.
What was that?
Matthew. I'm just going to Google it.
34.
Is that where it says this generation?
Mhm.
Okay, so somebody read Matthew 34.
Truly, I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened.
So generation in Jewish accounting for time is undisputed. Every biblical scholar agrees, no matter how you interpret this, everybody agrees. Jews count the generation as 40 years.
Okay.
So he put a time stamp on it. All these things will happen within the time period of 40 years.
I'm good with all that except
Okay.
his elect.
So how about this? How about, and I'm saying how about, because, I mean, when you use this kind of language, it's hard to see. We weren't there. The records from that time are pretty sparse. But in the account in Luke, the Gospel of Luke, there's the one verse that after his resurrection, the dead saints were seen alive and people interacted with them in Jerusalem, multitudes of them.
And that's only in Luke.
Mm-hmm. Yep. There's one verse. It's about 3 sentences long.
That one.
So he went and the dead saints rose.
So those were his elect.
It didn't say like there's never going to be more elect.
All of my elect. Okay.
Yeah, that's one way. I mean, when you get into apocalyptic type of writing and you put your timestamp on it, you say, okay, now how can I fit this in this timestamp? That's what we do in the Old Testament when we see apocalyptic writing. It's tried and true. In the Old Testament, when you see it, you go look for the time clues, and then you interpret it based on all the time clues you have around. All I'm doing is taking that exact same interpretation method that everybody uses for the Old Testament. I'm just applying it to the New Testament. Same people, Jewish culture, same general time frame within a few hundred years. I mean, same thing. So therefore, I don't think Jesus lied. Either that, or some people might say, well, some commentators will say, well, this generation just means a type of people. I don't think so. He said this generation multiple times. When he said all the punishment, all God's wrath is going to come on this generation in chapter 23, I think it's pretty specific. He meant those people that were sitting right in front of him. Those Pharisees, they were going to get it. And they were going to kill him, and they were about to kill even more people. They killed all the apostles. They killed other Christians. They were about to just go on a killing spree of all God's elect and people. And all that was going to come down them. And in fact, when they offered him up to Pilate, Pilate says, his blood's not on my hands. And they go, it's on ours and our children's. They took it. They said, it's on us. Jesus told them it was too. And I'm not lying, it's not funny, it's crazy, but it's just like, I mean, there's multiple places there while Jesus is in Jerusalem, there at the end, where this generation's referenced, and it means those people. So you got to put a time frame on it. So that's how we've always in the Old Testament interpreted apocalyptic writing, is interpreted based on the time frames and events that they give you. So we apply that in the New Testament. So then when we get to the book of Revelation, there are three main groupings of how to interpret it, okay? And then there are some subtypes. I want to list the main three across the board here. There is the
Idealist.
Yeah. Idealist. There is the, what's the next one?
Futurist.
Futurist. I mean, I know them, but I'll put them in the order they're on my list. Futurist and then preterist, right?
Right.
Futurist and preterist. Okay. And then these are the main categories. And underneath these, idealism, there's nothing underneath it. It's its own. It's the most popular view in the world. Anytime the Catholic Church has that view, it's almost always most popular because they make up like 21% of all Christians in the world. So you get them and a couple of the denominations go in, and you're at the majority. Okay? So this is what Catholics have always believed. Methodists hold this interpretation officially. I mean, if you look at the doctrine from the church, now some pastor or some congregation may not believe this, but if you go look at their denominational beliefs, that's their belief. So here's idealism. Idealism based, let me give you a sheet here so you'll have it. Here we go. All right. There's 2 pages, so grab 2. There's your 2. Grab 2 and pass on. All right. So in idealism, they say we may identify. Okay. They say we may identify in Revelation. You may identify this meaning Romans, right? But it doesn't actually record exact events. It's basically Romans as any earthly power that persecutes people. Yeah, any bad earthly power that persecutes people. And so as you go through the entire book of Revelation, idealism is literally what it says. It's creating an idea or an ideal. It's creating an idea or an ideal and using symbolic language to do it. And it has a general message that no matter how earthly governments may become corrupt and persecute you as Christians, no matter what affliction you may be under, that God is there with you, Christ is there with you, and you'll always win out in the end, and God will always cast judgment upon evil and bad things, or bad people. And they'll say that's it. That's the nutshell. And as you read through the book of Revelations, this view even says sometimes they retell the same theme like 3 different times. Like the book of Revelation tells it, then it retells it, tells it again using different different language, different judgments, different people, like different group. Like the Romans are a big theme in it, but it could use different scenarios. It retells it multiple times. And most idealists say the book of Revelation is just something that's told. Yeah, the story, the basic gist of the story of no matter what happens and good overcoming evil and will win in the end is retold 3 different times. But that's the general view. The biggest criticism of this view is never discussing actual real events. And most apocalyptic writing is discussing a real event. So that's the biggest criticism here. Futurists. I'll put it this way. I'm going to start where I'm at. I'm in this camp. But if I wasn't in this camp, I would be here.
Really?
I would never be in this camp, ever.
Well, I'm right there in the middle of that camp.
I know. I would never be. And if you are, that's fine. I'm just saying when I teach and I preach, just realize that when I teach this, I am anti this camp even. I'm not even neutral to that camp. I'm very anti that camp. So futurists. Futurists fall into a couple categories. There's classic premill, and it's also called Chileism. Classic premill is a new name for it, but traditionally it's called Chileism. It's on the paper, but another name for it, I think somewhere, or maybe in the main paper I gave you guys. But anyway, it was originally called Chileism. It was popular for a little while, and then it died out. But this idea is the events in Revelation are prophesying future events that have not unfolded to this day. Okay. Then there's dispensational premill. That's its own flavor. Biggest problem with this one's my biggest. I have less of a problem with this one. I have the biggest problem right here as far as their interpretation of the Bible, because it's more than just Revelation. It's the whole interpretation scheme of the Bible is different. And then there is this one's odd. It's some people list it in its own category, but it's called historicism. Very few churches believe this today. Or historic. Yeah, it's like historicism. Anyways, it's got a C there. Whatever. This one's a little odd. It was invented and became very popular during the Protestant Reformation. And it basically it's still a futurist view as far as to the first century. But it basically says the book of Revelation is similar to these people in the future of the first century. But they were to say, but it unfolds throughout the church's history. And they symbolize like the beast is the Pope, is what most of them believe.
I heard that.
Mm-hmm. And then they'll say, maybe half of Revelation's already happened, and they'll name the events through church history that happened, that they happened. And then they'll say, but these events are still yet to come. So that's why I put them in the futurist camp. Some people will take this out and make it its own fourth category, but it's still the general it's still the general premise that it's future. Revelation was talking about future events to the first century. Churches, the Assemblies of God, I think, still believe this today, but it was definitely during the Reformation, because they were rejecting the Catholic Church and thought the Catholic Church was evil. They were that the Pope was the leader of it. They thought the Pope was the beast, the Antichrist, whatever. And because they were doing crazy things back then. They were selling indulgences. They go door to door like vacuum salesmen and say, "We're trying to raise money for the church. We stored up so much grace with God that and the church can dispense that. So if there's any sin that you like to commit, just pay us now, and we'll forgive you in advance for that sin." So you got to realize the time that they were coming from, why they thought that this was about the futurism was about the Catholic Church and that the Pope was the beast and all this stuff. But it's kind of that. But again, I think Assemblies of God still buying this. Maybe a few other small denominations, but it's by far the least popular view of any of these today. It was only popular in any extent during the Protestant Reformation. Then you have preterism. There are two types. There's partial or just regular preterist. Partial, again, or just regular preterist. And then the other type, which is kind of new within the last 50 years or so, they're called hyper or full preterist. Full or hyper. Some people call them hyper. They believe, so the difference between these two, this is my camp. This is where I have kind of landed in my studies. But basically, preter comes from the Greek word praeter. It means past. It means it happened in the past. Is really what it means. Our past. So when I say the past, not the past to the writer, but our past in the first century. The church's past. So
I hope you're right.
thank you. I know what you meant by it, but I just said thank you. But they used to just be called preterists. But about 50 years ago, this kind of started creeping in, and now we've got to separate ourselves and say we're partial preterists, because Preterist just meant that until recently. But basically what this says is pretty much everything in the Bible prior to Revelation chapter 20 has already happened. And the part in Thessalonians where Paul talks about that those who are alive will not precede those who are, that section about Jesus come down, them rising out of the grave. That's a general resurrection. So these folks can say the general resurrection is still going to happen. Jesus is still coming back down the clouds, just like it said in Acts that he would do. And they will acknowledge those verses, the one in 1 Thessalonians, as being in our future. And everything after the first part of Revelation chapter 20. Where it says he will reign for 1,000 years, and then parts where it says Satan will be loose for a very short time, that's where the line is drawn. And then they say everything else is in the future after that. But everything prior to that, they'll say is in the past. These folks, it's almost heretical. Like they say everything in the Bible, including the resurrection, has already happened. In fact, they'll say the resurrection is like spiritual, not physical. And the reason that's where they get into heresy. Because Paul's like, no. If somebody denies the physical resurrection of Jesus and us, then that's outside. That's out of bounds. It's heresy. So this is by most people, including these people, like by everybody in this board except those folks, they consider this view heretical because of that, because it denies the general resurrection. So this is what we're going to be teaching in this pass through Revelation, is preterism, partial preterism. Now, the key is where we're going to start next week. That this is a clean break, because the most important way to interpret it this way, is dating it. Right? We've got to put date stamps and wrappers around it. Jesus clearly did his. He mentioned 3 times in a matter of 3 chapters, this generation. 3 times in 3 chapters, this generation. And so it put a time wrapper on it, okay? So next week we're going to get into the book of Revelation, and does it put a time wrapper on itself? I would argue it does in chapter 1, verse 1. It puts a time. So then the only question left then, it says in chapter 1, verse 1, and this is a preview for next week. It says in chapter 1, verse 1, it'll be these things. Different translations say slightly different things, but it's basically will quickly come to pass, shortly come to pass. But basically, it's an immediate urgency, just like Jesus would say, the kingdom's at hand. Right? It's the same kind of urgency that Revelation chapter 1, verse 1 puts on everything after that until you get to that time shift in Revelation chapter 20 where it talks about that long period of time difference. So until you get there, puts a time wrapper of immediacy. And then the only question left to answer for your interpretation, in the way I look at it, is that when was it written? If it happened immediately after, immediately I mean pretty quick. I mean, when Jesus said the kingdom of heaven's at hand, that all took place in the span of 3.5 years, his ministry.
Before the 40 years.
Right. Yeah. So, right. When Jesus says it's at hand, from the time he said that to the end of his ministry is 3.5 years. So when Jesus used that kind of nearness, it was talking about very short time, a few years. So then I would argue that we'll look at it next. That's where we'll look at next week. When was it written? That whenever it was written, probably happened within a few years of whenever it was written. And so we got to figure that out. That's the key to interpreting. So we will look at that next week where we'll start. So the introduction will take 2 weeks, and then we'll hop right into chapter 1, verse 1. We will hit a couple places in Revelation next week because there's internal evidence and external evidence. And next week we'll look at a couple places of internal evidence, and we're not going to read them for what the whole chapter says, but we're going to look at the clues. There's a couple places it offers clues inside of Revelation internal to when it was written. And we will look at some of those scriptures next week. So we'll get into a little bit of Revelation next week. So that's all we got tonight. Hope you guys enjoyed the overview of what apocalyptic writing is and how people try to deal with Revelation when it comes to the apocalyptic writing. Next week, we'll try to put a date stamp on it.